All right, welcome to the October 13th Building Fire Plumbing Committee meeting. We're here to discuss some provisions for the family home childcare section R331 in the IRC. And this will affect some other sections in the building code and the fire code, but those are kind of inconsequential to the provisions and will be made to correlate changes in the IRC. I will now turn over the meeting to Micah Chappelle, our chair.
I didn't know I was chair of this committee. I thought that was the building tag. It's a job, but here we go. News to me. It should be Tony. It's all Tony.
I think it's all you now, Micah. You're the chair for a lot of things.
Yeah, Micah, you just got promoted.
Yeah, no worries. I can handle it. Okay, fantastic. Well, as Dustin said, BFP committee, and we are here to discuss the off-cycle rule changes. But first, we're going to do welcome and introductions, which Dustin kind of started. But I'm Micah Chappelle. I represent code officials on the State Building Code Council. And let's go ahead and go through BFP committee members and introduce yourselves, then SBCC staff, and then we'll move into the public and let anyone that'd like to introduce themselves do so.
Should I commence the roll call first before we do that?
Sure, absolutely.
All righty. So Micah Chappelle as chair is here. Next we have Tony Doan.
Here.
Todd Bayreuther. I'm not seeing in our guest list. Damon Doyle. I'm not seeing in the guest list. Craig Holt. Not in our guest list. And Roger Hiringa, which I am also not seeing in the guest list. So with that, we do not have quorum. We need a minimum of 4 for quorum today. And I'll turn it back to you, Micah.
Well, that's wonderful. Hopefully some folks will log in while we do introductions. And if we don't have a quorum by the time we get to item 2, we will just have a discussion on it with no motion or vote. Same with the minutes and going from there. So with that, go ahead and have I think, Tony, are you the only other committee member that's here?
Correct.
That's correct.
All right. Tony, introduce yourself, then SBCC staff, and then members of the public, please. Thanks.
Okay, Tony Doan. I'm the chair of the fire tag as well as the chair of the State Building Code Council. Do you need more from me, Micah?
No, that's great. I will, Stoyan, if I need to call names, let's go with it. Stoyan, then Dustin.
This is Stoyan Bumbalov. I'm the State Building Code Council Managing Director, and I'm here to support Dustin, who is doing a great job on this task.
My name is Dustin Kerb. I'm the code specialist for the State Building Code Council staff, representing for the building code, the residential code, the fire code, the WUI code, and the plumbing code. And I do dabble in the mechanical code a little bit.
Thanks, Dustin. Then Rosanna.
Yes, my name is Rosanna Ghani, and I'm an administrative assistant here at SBCC.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Any members of the public or other tag members from one of the participating tags would like to unmute and introduce themselves, feel free. If you do want me to recognize you without calling names, just do a virtual hand raise and that would work too. Thanks. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, my name's Tom Handy. I represent the Eastern Washington counties on the SBCC.
Thanks, Tom. Ben?
Hi, Ben Omura, representing mechanical engineers on SBCC.
Thanks, Ben. Oh, I lost my screen all of a sudden. Dave?
Dave Kokot, Fire Protection Engineer with Spokane Fire Department, serving as Fire Protection Engineer Representative on the IFC tag.
Thanks, Dave. Ardell?
Ardell Jalla, building official for City of Seattle. And I was part of the DCYF work group that's drafted this language with input from the tags.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. All right. I don't see any other hands up, but if there's anyone else who'd like to unmute and introduce themselves, feel free. I'll wait a moment for that. All right. Hearing none. Again, this is the BFP committee to discuss the ongoing rules. The item number 2 is review and approve the agenda. Obviously, we don't have a quorum, but I will take input on the agenda. If there's any changes that need to be made, we can take that under recommendation. All right, hearing none, we will move to item 3. Again, we can review the minutes from these meetings, but there's no quorum to approve them. If we'd like to review them, we can. If we want to, we can also skip this item. But since it does allow for public comment on this item, I say let's at least review them and take any applicable public comment. So if you wouldn't mind pulling up the March 10th minutes. And I'm not sure who's controlling the screen, if that's you, Dustin, or Rosanna. Or...
I've got it.
Thank you. Any comments on the minutes from March 10th? That includes for the public as well. All right, hearing none, we will please pull up the April 14th minutes. Same request. Any comments on the April 17th minutes? April 14th minutes, sorry. Okay. We can pull up the final minutes on the agenda, May 17th. Any comments on those minutes from the public or the TAG members or BFP committee members? All right. Thank you for showing those, Dustin. Again, we will have to approve those at a later meeting when we have a quorum. With that, we will move into item 4. I do have a request for SBCC staff. I'm not seeing any documents posted on the meeting. Even if you click the link in the agenda.
Okay. I don't actually, we didn't get those linked in. My apologies. We do have them available to view here. Let me get my screen share going on that one.
Okay. If there's any members of the public in attendance today that would like to have that document to review, let us know. If you'll raise your hand real quick so we can maybe email that to you. I know sometimes it's a little easier to have on your own screen, so I definitely want to make that available for our meeting beyond just sharing it on the screen. I see the hand up from Tom. His hand in the video.
Michael, we'll work to get those on the website here real quick as well.
Okay. I appreciate that. I know there's some, or there was a recommended option, but I do want to go through the options again. I think there's some additional public comment that would occur on that possibly and go from there. I know that Ardell is on and did a significant amount of work on this document and put forward most of the changes, language, working with the work groups. And then we voted on some options, and I imagine we need to walk through that again for this meeting and discuss that. So if Ardell, if you have the opportunity, I'd be thrilled if you wanted to walk us through the document very quick. And if not, I can either do that or SBCC staff can do that, whichever you'd like.
Sure. I'm happy to talk through it. Dustin, awesome. Thank you for sharing the screen. If you mind scrolling a little further up, please. And if I need to go into further detail for anyone on the call, please let me know. I think most of the people on currently have some familiarity with the provisions as currently proposed, but I'll give an overview here. So what you'll see is the 2021 existing provisions for family home childcare. And what's red and underlined are the proposed changes by the Family Home Child Care Work Group and as reviewed and voted to move forward by the combined IRC and IFC tags. And that, I believe, happened, was that just last week?
Just last week on the 4th.
Okay. And so here we are. Thank you. And again, the intent here is to provide a path for family home child care providers to take advantage of a 13+ capacity waiver that licensing is offering, and that's DCYF, and to still remain within the Washington State Residential Code. And so for family home child care with more than 6 children, that's R331. Those are the existing provisions, again in black, and those go up to the current definition, which extends to 12 children. What this proposal does is creates a new section, R331.2, that is additional provisions that apply to a family home child care that is using the DCYF capacity waiver to go from 12 and increase it up to 16 children. And what we have done is some cleanup of the existing base provisions for up to 12 children. And then we've added criteria for the increase. So you'll see in 331.1, the first change is a reference back to the door provisions of the IRC, R311.2. And the next change, item 4 in red there, is a cleanup of the existing language. So it would also allow a P2904 system, which is permitted within the IRC. Dustin, can you scroll? Thanks. That same language on the cleanup of the sprinkler system sentence is consistent throughout the section, so you'll see that repeated there. Thank you. Scroll ahead. You can scroll further. This is a section, smoke alarms and heat detectors. Again, we've provided explicit reference back to IRC 314 and as per new construction. And so the intent is to get interconnected smokes and the locations as per R314, as well as a power source from the building wiring and a battery backup. And that's all as per new construction. We also asked for an additional heat detector, and the language resides to in each kitchen, because there are some that may have the kitchen in the home and the kitchen in the family home child care. Or it could be a duplex. The next one section is R331.2, and this was the additional provisions to increase from 12 up to 16 children. The first item was illumination requirements at the stairs, interior stairs serving childcare areas. So those would be on building power supply, and would have an artificial light source. So basically battery backup would be fine there as well. And then the biggest sort of mitigation that we're getting in exchange for adding children is sprinklers are required. And again, we have the same verbiage, an automatic sprinkler system in accordance with P2904 or 13D. If you keep going. Dustin, this is not the version that I had sent, but that's okay. Keep going. So none of this needs to be included. You can stop there. There are accompanying changes that would need to carry forward in the IBC and the IFC to correlate this change in the IRC definition. And so that's what you'll see here. Again, the definition of family home child care increasing up to 16. Under Chapter 3, occupancy, use, and classification, same thing, 16. If you keep going down, it's a consistent change all the way through. Actually, I think what's going on, Dustin, is that you have it on all markups currently. And if you
I
just
do.
showed simple markup, that would take out, I had provided originally a lot of backup documentation, but simple markup will just show the code changes.
Gotcha.
If you scroll down further, so same thing in the Washington State Fire Code, definition changes to go from 12 to 16. I think that's it. There was a lot of discussion about other mitigation, fire alarms. It was one of the proposals included inclusion of a fire alarm. We talked about the provisions within the DCYF licensing extensively around, especially around their requirement for a 2-minute evacuation time on their drills. And that is something that DCYF for licensing regularly checks. One of the big changes that we don't have currently for family home child cares that they've put into place on the licensing side is that to get the capacity waiver, you are required to get a new to get sign off from the local jurisdiction. Currently, a jurisdiction does not always know where all the family home child care providers are located within their within the jurisdiction. And so this is again my personal opinion now. I think that's a significant addition to this proposal. That's while this shows the changes that are on the building code and the residential code, they've made some changes on the licensing side that I think are just as critical to understanding their proposal. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ardell. I would like to have a look at the multiple options for the BFP committee, just to go through those briefly and point out that the tag did have a recommendation, the combined tag did have a recommendation for one of the options, but we still need to discuss the other 2 options there. And that way this meeting has a thorough idea of those. And then, of course, I know most folks have already been on, so they probably already understand them. We shouldn't take too long to go through them. And then we can, since we don't have a quorum yet, I'm not sure if we'll get one today. We still will probably have to discuss the same options at the full council meeting for this topic. So Ardell did briefly mention these a little bit. The first one was sprinklers and a manual fire alarm, but the fire alarm was in another section as well. And the tag recommended, recommended striking that language. They made a determination that it didn't add much value to the increase. Then the other option as well is just to add sprinklers, which is what the tag recommended to do. Excuse me. And then the third option was to do sprinklers, but have some exception allowances for specific criteria that aligned with other areas of the code, similar to items for an I-4 occupancy, which is daycares and commercial facilities. So those were the options. If anybody has any further questions or input on those, feel free to speak up.
So Ardell, I believe you wanted to maybe bring forward some other changes to what we had approved by the tag that kind of align with some of these options. Not that we can take action on today, but I think it'd be good to talk about what you would like to maybe consider changing in the future.
I'd be happy to. Dustin, do you have the proposed edits document, or do you want me to share?
If you would like to share, I think that'd be better. I'll stop my share, and that way you can navigate as better for you. Sure. Plus, if I have the review settings wrong on that one, it'll be better.
Okay. So there's 2 changes. Again, Micah commented on the 3 options that were proposed. The first being a manual fire alarm plus a sprinkler, the second being the sprinkler, and the third being a sprinkler requirement with an exception for a family home childcare located at grade. And I would like to, I don't know how the formality of this, Micah, but I'd like to, on behalf of DCYF, submit a public comment to ask for consideration of sprinklers with the at-grade exception still. And so this is, let me know if that can be seen.
That's good.
Yes.
The family home childcare waiver was, I believe, originally directed by state legislation, and was looking for expanding capacity for family home or for childcare just across the state. And DCYF made those changes, but now we're trying to catch up with changes that would permit them to stay in the residential code. The added cost of sprinklers can be prohibitive for a family home childcare provider. There is increased risk to permit an exception. However, this exception has been drafted to allow the code official to look at the layout of the structure and make a determination whether they feel that their access to egress, again, located at grade and with a door leading directly to the exterior of the building, gives that additional time for those children and caregivers to quickly exit the building. So I'm just putting this forward again as a public comment on behalf of DCYF. Unfortunately, they were not able to attend today. That's it. I'm happy to open it to further discussion. Again, there was significant talk about the fire alarm system as per option 1 and included in option 3. As Micah noted, it was deemed to not really buy additional time and that I think you were getting a call direct to the station was the ad in that, and that the evacuation time, the required egress time was based on their drills is faster than the response time that the additional notice would get you.
Okay. Thank you, Ardell. Thank you for the public comment. I will have some comments on it myself, but I want to open the floor to the committee members and then members of the public as well to comment on this option or public comment. If folks want to do a virtual hand or just unmute some way, shape, or form, please feel free.
Yeah, this is Tom. I'm really happy to see this come forward personally. I think that, as was stated, requiring sprinklers in all cases would have been prohibitive, and it would have probably just been the same as saying, okay, nobody can have more than 12, because there would have just been so much expense in doing it. It would have never penciled out for the business, the childcare business. So thank you for putting this forward. I think that is a good move.
Thank you, Tom. We have others that would like to comment or discuss this option or the reason, the recommendation from the tag for the others. That'd be fine as well. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, good morning. There was a lot of discussion regarding this option. I think that the vote of the tags was very clear that there was a concern that doing this option is a reduction in potential safety of the facility, and it wasn't worth doing. Once we get to a certain number of people in a building, and 12 is actually higher than what the fire departments really wanted to see, we're responding to a facility that has an incident. We're going to have 16 kids, as well as adults, as well as people from the residents there. It's going to be more than some apartment buildings are going to have. It is going to be a challenge to be able to address the situation. There have to be some crowd control, things like that. From the standpoint of an engineer, I just don't see this as a reasonable approach of saying, well, sprinklers we know will control the fire, we know will protect the people in the building. So let's go to a situation where it may or may not do it. And from, I think the TAG's vote was very clear and it's basically saying it's not worth it. We want to have the children protected in this situation. And we understand that there is a crisis for daycare, but safety shouldn't be compromised to be able to accomplish what the additional places they have to have in the daycares. It makes no sense. So that's what I tend to hear from the TAG members when we did the vote. I think that I appreciate the effort that was put into this. I was involved heavily in the discussion as well, but it's not something that I feel that is reasonable to waive a for sure fire protection for something that may or may not work. It's just not worth the loss of a life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Anyone else want to have response or input? And we can have input on things that were said as well from other members. We have plenty of time. Okay. I know I'm sharing this, but I do represent code officials, and this was discussed at a recent meeting we had on Monday. And the code officials do like the options here instead of just the straight sprinklers. They have a few concerns on just requiring sprinklers. As you all are aware, this came about through actions through legislation and through DCYF. There are still some concerns from the code officials that legislation could be passed to eliminate this requirement and just allow the waivers. I think it's been very beneficial for DCYF to approach and work with SBCC to make changes to the code language so we're not in conflict, because they could allow these waivers like they have been previously without even approaching us. So I think this is beneficial. The code officials also like this. I know some of them had spoken with their fire officials, and taking into consideration fire response, enforcement, on-site, inspection, and identifying that yes, they can meet the criteria of this exception, that it was in an alternate path that would work for the code officials anyway. So they do support this. I know that they may not be here today to speak on that and had me provide some testimony on that, although I'm the chair. Of course, we will also have folks indicating the same thing. So there's some fire code officials that want this and some building officials that want this, and then there's some that want it the other way as well. But I do want to point out that it was mentioned the TAG recommended that it just be sprinklers. However, there were so very few TAG members there. I believe the vote was 5-1, which, yes, is a significant consensus. However, when you look at the actual number of TAG members for a combined TAG, IFC, IRC TAG, there just really was a lot of folks there. Although that was the appropriate recommendation that occurred based on the vote, I think that that we should, again, move all these forward to the full council and let the full council decide. This will be a public comment for the full council as well. But the code officials support this, as well as some of the other fire code officials that we've talked to. So we'll leave it at that. Again, I'll keep the floor open for folks to comment. Now, go ahead, Dave. I see your hand up.
Thank you. You made a general statement here, Mike, and this concerns me. You're saying code officials. It could be misconstrued that all code officials have that. Which code officials are you indicating? Is it building officials?
It's not all code officials. I represent code officials, and the ones I spoke to were part of the WABO Technical Code Development Committee, which is made up of mostly code officials. And we had this discussion on the options, and this is the option that they prefer for that group. Is it all code officials? No, I think that, I would have to go to the full WABO meeting. We will be discussing this at a full quarterly business meeting for the Washington Association of Building Officials at the end of this month. But of course, that won't occur before the October 20th meeting. But there will be many code officials there to testify next Friday. So good question, Dave. I apologize if I made a generalization, but
Because I
Thanks
just
for
want
pointing
to
that
make it clear that there were a number of fire code officials that provided testimony during the tag hearings. So generalizing that all code officials approve that, I would definitely take exception to. So I think you could say some code officials, but I'd be cautious of how you word that because it has an influence on tag
Sure.
on council members of how they interpret what's being stated.
Sure. So I'll rephrase that to some code officials and some fire code officials agree to these exceptions, and some fire code officials and some code officials disagree and want sprinklers only as well.
Okay.
Is that better for you, Dave?
That I've spoken with the Washington State Association of Fire Marshals. They're unanimous in the support of just sprinklers only. So I'll just be able to respond to what the building officials say versus what the Association of Fire Marshals states. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Tony, you had your hand up?
I think Dave caught most of it. One of my concerns was the code officials comment, just because I know the pushback from the fire code officials from the tag and also from those that Dave have spoke with on this. And another thing to keep in mind on this, that early on in these discussions, when the numbers were being presented as far as the need for childcare and and what this bump in the number of kids does to really solve that issue, it's really a very from the early meetings, the stats show that it's a very limited amount of solving the problem based on the whole issue and the entire need. And that was said very early on by DCYF. And so, and I think we need to be careful in waiving fire protection requirements for an occupancy limit of this size in a single family home. And so that, I agree with Dave on this, and I have no problem with, pushing the whole agenda forward to the council, but I do want it to be known that there are some definite concerns with fire code officials throughout the state.
Thanks, Tony. And I'll keep the floor open. Again, just for informational purposes, for folks that have not been part of the discussion previously, one of the items that the code officials do bring up is Section 903 of the building code for I-4, which is commercial daycare occupancies. Again, the first exception on here under sprinklers for childcare, they're located within 4 feet of grade level. That is an exception for I-4 occupancies. So if we don't have this, the code official pointing out, if we don't have this exception for residential, their understanding is that residential daycare facilities would have more restrictive requirements than the I-4 commercial occupancies for sprinklers, based on that exception alone, just based off code language. But again, this is a public comment. It's totally open for discussion. The tag did make a recommendation that it was just for sprinklers, and we're not disputing that, but we're just discussing the public comment. So any other discussion on this public comment? Okay.
Micah, this is Todd Short.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I'm fire marshal at City of Redmond. I'm also on the IRC tag. The fire code does allow a exception for I-4, but it requires that every room on the level of exit discharge have an exit door, or they have sprinklers. So that's right out of 903.2.6. And then I want to make the point, because we're providing this this residential versus commercial, the access codes for most jurisdictions are quite a bit more substantial in properties that are commercial than they are residential. So there are some very distinct differences when we're trying to make the leap from an I-4 exception to a home family daycare that may or may not have access, may or may not have certain things, and the national code requires fire sprinklers in these residential homes. The state of Washington is allowing each jurisdiction to make their own decision on that. So I just wanted to be a little bit cautious about this I-4 comparison, because I don't think that it's as substantial as some are making it out to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. I see Ardell's hand up, and I had a comment, but I'll wait to hear what Ardell says. Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer that this would be subject to approval of the code official. And so the idea was not to make it an outright allowance. And I think, Todd, we looked at a couple plans, and in the last meeting that included spaces that were configured where they did have a direct door from each of the childcare areas to the exterior, and where there was a room that didn't have access, that would not have been permitted. So I think that's subject to interpretation by a building official on whether, what that I-4 is exception, how it's written, is intended to be matched by this language. And then that's completely, I understand your concern about access to the property. And again, I think that would be subject to approval of the code official to be able to weigh those items, to be able to say yay or nay. Still, this is not an outright approval to use the exception.
Thanks, Ardell. I also wanted to mention that the exceptions 1 and 2 shown on the screen do align with 903.2.6 number 2. Todd, you mentioned that every room in that I-4 is required to have a door egress. That's not the case. It says every room where care is provided shall have that door. That's what item number 2 says here on this exception as well. Each childcare area shall have the door leading to the directly exterior. So this does align with that I-4 language, which already, again, for commercial uses allows for sprinklers not to be installed. I see Tom's hand up. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was just, one of the things that ran through my mind in comparing the commercial and the residential is, I think the commercials have the doors opening outward and the residential doesn't require that, or is that just implied in this exception here? That it would open outwardly or to be compatible with the commercial, or does it matter?
That's actually another public comment that I was going to bring, Tom. That's not a requirement in the residential code. You're correct.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there's an exception for the door swing for 50 or fewer occupants to allow that to swing in on a commercial facility. But again, there's more code there. And sounds like Ardell has a further public comment after we get through this exception, but I don't want to cut that off. Anybody else want to provide input on this? And again, if Tony or Dave or even Todd, if you want to come back and have additional comments, the floor is still open, please. We like debate.
Yeah, I'll say I'll reserve the remainder of my comments for the Building Code Council hearing.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Maybe we talk about it next week. Hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday. All right. With that, we will move on back to Ardell. You indicated you had another public comment you'd like to bring up, so I'll open the floor for that. You're muted.
This was a change that was made during the tag review, and in the third option, as was discussed, we had originally proposed it with doors. Sorry, let me see if I still have it. With a door reference back to R311.2 and that was only within the capacity waiver provisions. Through discussion at the tag, the existing requirement is that exterior exit doors shall be operable from the inside without the use of keys or any special knowledge or effort. And during the process of the tag review, you'll see in the other version that we struck shall be operable from the inside without the use of keys or any special knowledge or effort, and referenced all doors to comply with R311.2, all exterior exit doors. And in the residential code, the only door requirement is on the front door, or is the primary door. And so within the WAC legislation for family home childcare, they would permit a sliding glass door as a second door for an exterior exit door. And so we have homes across the state that are currently meeting this provision for operable from the inside without the use of keys or any special knowledge or effort, but that would not be fully compliant with R311.2. And so by putting this change in, we made a conflict now with the existing use of sliding doors as an exterior exit door, which is typical currently. And so I've proposed to go back to that language, operable from the inside without the use of keys or any special knowledge or effort, so that we are back in alignment and more consistent with with a configuration and the requirements of the IRC for R311.2 applying to only one of the exterior exit doors.
Thank you, Ardell.
Can I add one more thing? I mean, my guess is
Yes.
this was previously coordinated. This was one of those late changes that when it went back to DCYF, they were like, "Oh no, this makes them not, the areas that we're currently using not usable for many family home child cares."
Okay, it's a good catch on their part. I'll open the floor for discussion for both committee members and the public. Right. Just out of curiosity, is there any opposition from folks on this change to realign more or less with what we had previously with DCYF?
So this would be
maintaining the current language.
okay. And the 311.2 basically gets rid of the sliding glass because of the side hinge requirement.
Correct.
I think it makes sense.
Thank you, Tom. Do you have anything further, Tony? You're still unmuted.
That means I'm still thinking.
I thought that might be the case. You're still processing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If someone else can go ahead. I'm going to think about it.
And I think my concern here is are we doing retro on existing? I think for new construction, I could see requiring this and getting that alignment, but I think that's a bigger code change than we sort of understood at the time that it was added relative to the additional capacity.
Agreed. And just to verify again, folks, what Ardell is showing in gray is the current 2018 language for the state. The item in red was the proposal from the tag. And when that went back to DCYF, it was pointed out that that could cause a lot of problems. So the proposal here, the public comment, is to go back to the 2018 language for this specific section. And I did see you on mute, Tony, so maybe you were done processing.
a little bit. I'll think out loud. How's that?
That's great.
I think one of the issues is, let's see if my video, it does work. Okay. So I've been in a lot of these family home childcare facilities just from when I was doing fire code inspections for 6+ years. And I like the 311 too, although I understand the burden it puts on the person after the license. But those sliders, there seems to be a lot more variables with a slider in a home than there does, a side hinge. And that's the dowel in the door. That's, and depending on what the nature of the exiting is, if it is an emergency, I could just see that sliding door really ends up becoming an issue with special knowledge or effort because of the things that happen with those. And the ability to open that door easily, depending on who has to open it, whether it is a kid or not. Those are the things that I'm mulling through my head. But I totally understand the other side of it, that, yeah, you're looking at a construction cost there. So I get that. I do.
Thanks, Tony. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Tony, because as soon as you said that, I just started thinking about some of the daycares that I've seen and stuff. They've added some security measures in the sliding doors. So basically you have to know where that security lock is to unlock it. And so that would be a special knowledge for that. So I had not thought about that. I think we just need to tread on this very carefully to take a look at, is that really an exit door? Should it be considered an exit door?
Thanks, Dave. So you're all concerned right now is actually the current enforcement and not necessarily future modification to the language, because what we're talking about right now is a current enforcement issue, or what you're mentioning would be a current enforcement issue.
Yes.
Yeah. And with a bump in occupancy, obviously the idea is a bump in checks and balances for us. And so I think that's where the 311.2 comes in. And
would it make sense then to tie it to the increase? And then address it at the next cycle and whether it needs to be a change for the existing conditions? I think I'm just trying to find some middle ground here.
Sure. No, I follow.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
And just for discussion, Ardell, you mentioned, I believe, that this change kind of causes a issue with the language of 311.2 that says not less than one door shall be provided for each dwelling, where this language says two, and then what do those two have to meet? And
right.
I like
so currently you would have one that does meet it by the language of 311.2, but like many homes would have your other doors could be sliders, and so, it isn't the required exterior exit door, because a family home childcare requires two, and one of those can be an EERO. You still get compliance from the front door. By changing this here, we are making all doors comply with R 311.2. So it is an increase over the existing provisions. And that may make sense for the additional children, right? But we've taken away that, again, this change was kind of tied to the exception that we didn't approve, right? So that's again, it's a little circular, but I'm trying to, that's what I would like to tie it back to the additional children, if that is the desire or the recommendation of the tag, or pardon me, of the BFP. I can draft that for the next meeting. I can actually I
see Tony's video shaking his head. Oh, I can see a thumbs up from Dave. I like that option as well. If that's something that can be put forward to the full council. and then they can make that decision on whether they want to tie that in or not have it required at all and just maintain the existing language. So we appreciate you putting that together for the next meeting, Del. It sounds like you got some approvals there.
And I think this, so could this be, sorry, I'm trying to do this on the fly to make sure I'm meeting what you're all thinking. So exterior exit doors serving childcare areas shall comply. Let me just oh, I'm sorry. Shall comply with the requirements of R311.2. So then again, it's tied back to the increase. Sorry, I see there's a hand,
right.
Micah.
I see that. Go ahead, Tom.
Would it make sense? I mean, in some areas, in rural areas, you know, where a lot of these are, there's no real need to have the doors locked. You know, in some urban areas, maybe that's not the case. But could there be language that says or be, you know, unlocked during operation hours included in that?
I think that's definitely something that can be discussed as an addition for sure.
I can also check what the DCYF requirements are out of that may already be a requirement.
Right. Thank you, Tom. Ben, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering if we should limit it to, like, as you write it for R311.2, if it should also expand into 311.1 or 3, excuse me, for the landing provisions and what happens outside of that door. So it's not just emptying out onto like an uneven grade or something like that.
Good suggestion. I think we'd have to pull some of the code language and review that. As an option. All right. It sounds like we have a few more things to discuss, at least at the council level, if they want to make that full discussion, or they may send it back to either the TAG or the BFP committee to see if we can get a consensus on some of these proposed changes and public comments. I know one of them that the TAG already voted on, but again, it's coming back as a public comment or something else. So, okay. Any other items or proposed changes to this, or any other public comments on the various sections? And any other public comments in general?
Again, I just want to say thank you to the IRC and the IFC TAG, as well as this committee, for the continued discussion. And this is a hard one to balance, and I appreciate where the fire marshals are at. And I have also heard, a lot of other testimony around childcare that I feel like there are some, by making it subject to the code official, I think similarly, this is currently being enforced around the doors, and code officials are making a determination whether it does meet, sorry, what was the language? Whether it meets the special knowledge or effort. And so I'm okay leaving it with the code officials on that enforcement. And so I think that this moving it into the exception or the increased children provisions makes some sense. So I appreciate the feedback today.
I just second
Thank you,
appreciation. I think clarity around this is going to be really helpful, and for providers and for people who are supporting them.
Thank you, Anjali. Dustin, see you.
Yeah, I just want to also thank everybody and kind of express that it is the hope of DCYF to get this out there as soon as possible. And in my discussions with them, I expressed to them that it would be kind of my hope to have this go into effect with the March 15th effective date of the 2021 codes. And as we stand right now, we have some wiggle room as far as timing of things. So if this got kicked back to a tag at the council meeting, there is still time for when we file the CR 102 for the public comment period to elapse, and we still have the time to work that. But it's not a whole lot of time. And so, but that I just wanted to kind of give an informational update on, it is the hope to get this kind of move forward so that we are in alignment with the DCYF WAC and with the building code WAC, and that, the ultimate goal for, the work group right now is to have this go into effect on March 15th with everything else, barring any other fiascos as far as delays and things like that. So that's all I wanted to say, and I appreciate everybody, with the input and ideas on this, and looking forward to see where this ends up.
Thank you, Dustin. All right. With that, sorry, I go back to my agenda. I think that was, of course, I lost my agenda completely. I believe that was the last item on the agenda. Oops, I can't get it to come up. I could be dead wrong. No, it's not. So with that, I will call, I believe that would complete item number 4. I still don't believe we have a quorum. Verify with Dustin one more time that we do not have a quorum. I thought I saw Greg Holt get on, but I'm not sure if we still have a quorum. But I don't see him as part of the members currently. You're muted.
It's still just you and Tony as far as committee members in the room at the moment.
Okay, excellent. So with that, that will conclude item number 4, since we don't have a quorum to take action on that item. There was a tag recommendation, so that will move forward to the full council, as well as the public comments, and again, further discussion for the council to make the final decision, hopefully. And if not, they decide that some of the items still need further discussion, then they can make the decision to either send it back to the BFP committee or back to the tag for further discussion and action. With that, I will move into item number 5 for other business for the BFP committee, and I will open the floor for that.
I just wanted to mention that the next council meeting's on October 20th, coming up pretty quick.
Excellent. And this will be on that agenda. I can't remember. I'm not sure if I've seen the agenda yet.
Agenda is posted, and yes, this is in the agenda for the council meeting on 20th.
Okay. With that, I would like to ask if we can get the document with the proposed changes and public comments, or if those have to be separate or something else, we can get that posted sooner rather than later, so folks can have time to review those. That'd be greatly appreciated. I know you guys have a lot of work to do, SBCC staff, but that would be appreciated if that could occur. Excellent. All right, last call for other business. Fantastic. Again, I want to say thank you to all those that have participated through this process, and hopefully a final step or two, and then we can get this moved forward into the final rulemaking and on to the WAC so it can be used. Thanks everybody for your time. And with that, I will call meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya.
Thank you.